Section 11 of the Fifth Queen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. The Fifth Queen, by Ford Madox Ford. Part 2, Chapter 4. Men shall make us cry in the end, steel our hearts how we will, she said to Margot Poins, who found her weeping with her head down upon the table, above a piece of paper. I would weep for no man, Margot answered. Large, florid, fair, and slow-speaking, she gave way to one of her impulses of daring that covered her afterwards with immense blushes and left her buried in speechless confusion. I could never weep for such an oaf as your cousin. He beats good men. Once he sold a farm to buy me a gown, Katharine said, and he goes to a sure death if I may not stay him. It is even the province of men to die, Margot answered. Her voice, gruff with emotion, astonished herself. She covered her mouth with the back of her great white hand, as if she wished to wipe the word away. Beseech you, spoil not your eyes with sitting to write at this hour for the sake of this roaring boy. Katharine sat to the table. A gentle knocking came at the door. Let no one come. I have told the serving knave as much. She sank into a pondering over the wording of her letter to Bishop Gardiner. It was not to be thought of that her cousin should murder a prince of the Church. Therefore the bishop must warn the Catholics in Paris that Cromwell had this in mind. And Bishop Gardiner must stay her cousin on his journey, by a false message if needs were. It would be an easy matter to send him such a message as that she lay dying and must see him, or anything that should delay him until this cardinal had left Paris. The great maid behind her back was fetching from the clothes-prop a water-globe upon its stand. She set it down on the table before the rushlight, moving on tiptoe, for to her the writing of a letter was a sort of necromancy, and she was distressed for Katharine's sake. She had heard that to write at night would make a woman blind before 30. The light grew immense behind the globe. Watery rays flickered broad upon the ceiling and on the hangings, and the paper shone with a mellow radiance. The gentle knocking was repeated, and Katharine frowned, for before she was half-way through with the humble words of greeting to the bishop, it had come to her that this was a very dangerous matter to meddle in, and that she had no one by whom to send the letter. Margot could not go, for it was perilous for her maid to be seen near the bishop's quarters with all Cromwell's men spying about. Behind her was the pleasant and authoritative voice of old Sir Nicholas Rashford talking to Margot Poins. Katharine caught the name of Sicily Elliot, the dark maid of honour who had flouted her a week ago, and had pinned up her sleeve that day in Privy Seal's house. The old man stood, grey and sturdy, his hand upon her doorpost. His pleasant, keen eyes blinked upon her in the strong light from her globe as if he were before a good fire. "Why, you are as fair as a saint with a halo in front of that jigamaree," he said. "I am sent to offer you the friendship of Sicily Elliot." When he moved, the golden collar of his knighthood shone upon his chest, his cropped grey beard glistened on his chin, and he shaded his eyes with his hand. "I am writing of a letter," Katharine said. She turned her face towards him. The stray rays from the globe outlined her red curved lips, her swelling chest, her low forehead, and it shone like the moon rising over a hill, yellow and fiery in the hair above her brow. The lines of her face drooped with her perplexities, and her eyes were large and shadowed, because she had been shedding many tears. "Cicely Elliot shall make you a good friend," he said, with a modest pride of his property. "She shall marry me, therefore I do her such services." "You are old for her," Katharine said. He laughed. "Since I have neither chick nor child, and am main rich for a subject." "Why, she is happy in her servant," Katharine said abstractedly. "You are a very famous knight." "There are ballads of me," he answered complacently. "I pray to die in a good tulzie yet." "If Cicely Elliot have her scarf in your helmet," Katharine said, "I may not give you mine." She was considering of her messenger to the bishop. "Will you do me a service?" "Why?" he answered with a gentle mockery.
You have one tricksy swordsman to bear your goodly colours.'
Katharine turned clean about to him and looked at him with attention, to make out whether he might be such a man as would carry her letter for her. He returned her gaze directly, for he was proud of himself and of his fame. He had fought in all the wars that a man might fight in since he had been 18, and for 15 years he had been captain of a troop employed by the Council in keeping back the Scots of the borders. It was before Flodden Field that he had done his most famous deed, about which there were many ballads. Being fallen upon by a bevy of Scotsmen near a tall hedge, after he had been unhorsed, he had set his back into a thorn bush, and had fought for many hours in the rear of the Scottish troop, alone and with only his sword. The ballad that had been made about him said that 17 corpses lay in front of the bush after the English won through to him. But since Cromwell had broken up the northern councils and filled them again with his own men of no birth, the old man had come away from the borders, disdaining to serve at the orders of knaves that had been butchers' sons and worse. He owned much land and was very wealthy, and having been very abstemious, because he came of an old time when knighthood had still some of the sacredness and austerity of a religion, he was a man very sound in limb and peaceable of disposition. In his day he had been esteemed the most graceful whiffler in the world. Now he used only the heavy sword, because he was himself grown heavy. Katharine answered his gentle sneer at her cousin. "It is true that I have a servant, but he is gone and may not serve me." Yet the knight would find it in the books of chivalry that certain occasions or great quests allowed of a knight's doing the errands of more than one lady, but one lady, as for instance the celebrated Dorinda, might have her claims asserted by an illimitable number of knights, and she begged him to do her a service.
"I have heard of these errantry books," he said. "In my day there were none such, and now I have no letters."
"How then do you pass the long days of peace?" Katharine asked, "if you neither drink nor dice?"
He answered, "In telling of old tales and teaching their paces to the king's horses." He drew himself up a little. He would have her understand that he was not a horse-leech, but there was in these four-footed beasts a certain love for him, so that Richmond, the king's favourite gelding, would stand still to be bled if he but laid his hand on the great creature's withers to calm him. These animals he loved, since he grew old and might not follow arguments and disputations of hick and hock. "There were none such in my day, but a good horse is the same from year's end to year's end."
"Will you carry a letter for me?" Katharine asked.
"I would have you let me show you some of his Highness's beasts," he added. "I breed them to the manage myself. You shall find none that step more proudly in Christendom or heathenesse."
"Why, I believe you," she answered. Suddenly she asked, "You have ridden as knight-errant?"
He said, "For 3 weeks only. Then the Scots came on too thick and fast to waste time."
His dark eyes blinked and his broad lips moved humorously with his beard.
"I swore to do service to any lady. Pray you, let me serve you."
"You can do me a service," she said. He moved his hand to silence her.
"Pray you, take it not amiss, but there is one that hates you."
She said, "Perhaps there are a many, but do me a service if you will."
"Look you," he said, "these times are no times of mine, but I know it is prudent to have servitors that love one. I saw yours shake a fist at your door."
Katharine said, "A man?" She looked at Margot, who, big, silent and flushed, was devouring the celebrated hero of ballads with adoring eyes. He laughed.
"That maid would kiss your feet, but in these days it is well to make friends with them that keep doors. The fellow at yours would spit upon you if he dared."
Katharine said carelessly, "Let him even spit in his imagination, and I shall whip him." The old knight looked out of the door. He left it wide open, so that no man might listen.
"Why, he is still gone," he said.
He cleared his throat.
"See you," he began. "So I should have said in the old days. These fellows then we could slush open to bathe our feet in their warm blood when we came tired foot from hunting. Now it is otherwise. Such a loon may be a spy set upon one."
He turned stiffly and majestically to move back her new hangings that only that day, in her absence at Privy Seal's, had been set in place. He tapped spots in the wall with his broad and gentle fingers, talking all the time with his broad back to her.
"See you, you have had here workmen to hang you a new arras. There be tricks of boring ear-holes through walls and hanging these things, so that if you have a cousin who shall catch a scullion by the throat—"
Katharine said hastily, "He hath heard little to harm me."
"It is what a man swears he hath heard that shall harm one,"
the old knight answered.
"I meddle in no matters of statecraft, but I am sent to you by certain ladies. One shall wed me, and I am her servant. One bears my name, and wedded a good cousin of mine, now dead for his treasons."
Katharine said, "I am beholden to Sicily Elliot and the Lady Rochford." He silenced her with one of his small gestures of old-fashioned dignity and distinction.
"I meddle in none of these matters," he said again. "But these ladies know that you hate one they hate."
He said suddenly,
"Ah!"
a little grunt of satisfaction. His fingers tapping gently made what seemed a stone of the wall quiver and let drop small flakes of plaster. He turned gravely upon Katharine.
"I do not ask what you spoke of with that worshipful swordsman," he said, "but your servitor is gone to tell upon you. A stone is gone from here, and there is his ear-hole, like a drum of canvas."
Katharine said swiftly, "Take, then, a letter for me, to the Bishop of Winchester." He started back with a little exaggerated pantomime of horror.
"Must I go into your plots?"
he asked, blinking and amused, as if he had expected the errand. She said urgently, "I would have you tell me what Englishman now wears a red hat and is like to be in Paris. I am very ignorant in these matters."
"Then meddle not in them," he said, "for that man is even Cardinal Pole, one that the King's Highness would very willingly know to be dead."
"God forbid that my cousin should murder a prince of the Church, and be slain in that quarrel," she answered. He started back and held his hands over his head.
"Why, God help you, child! Is that your errand?" he said, deep from his chest. "I meddle not in this matter."
She answered obstinately, "Pray you, by your early vows, consent to carry me my letter." He shook his head bodingly.
"I thought it had been a matter of a masque at the Bishop of Winchester's, or I had never come nigh you. Cicely Elliot hath copied out the part you should speak. Pray you ask me no more of the other errand."
She said, "For a great knight you are a friend only in little matters." He uttered reproachfully,
"Child, it is no little matter to act as go-between for the Bishop of Winchester, even if it be for no more than a masque. How otherwise does he not send to you direct? So much I was ready to do for you, a stranger, who am a man that has no party."
She uttered maliciously, "Well, well, I thought you came of the better times before our day."
"I have shown myself a good enough man,"
he said composedly. He pointed one of his fingers at her.
"Pole is not one that shall be easily slain. He is like to have in his pay the defter Spadassins of the two. I have known him since he was a child, till when he fled abroad."
"But my cousin," Katharine pleaded.
"For the sake of your own little neck, let that gallant be hanged," he said smartly. "You have need of many friends, I can see it in your complexion, which is of a hasty loyalty. But I must tell you, I had never come near you, so your cousin miscalled me, a man of worth and credit, had these ladies not prayed me to come to you."
She raised herself to her full height. "It is not in the books of your knight-errantry," she cried, "that one should leave one's friends to the hangman of Paris." The large figure of Margot Poins thrust itself upon them. "A God's name," said her gruff voice of great emotion, "hear the words of this valiant soldier. Your cousin shall ruin you. It is true that he will drive from you all your good friends." She faltered, and her impulse carried her no further. Rochford tapped her flushed cheek gently with his glove, but a light and hushing step in the corridor made them all silent. The Magister Udal stood before the door blinking his eyes at the light. Katharine addressed him imperiously. "You will carry a letter for me to save my cousin from death." He started, and leered at Margot, who was ready to sink into the ground.
Why, I had rather carry a bull to the temperature of Jupiter, as Macrobius has it,' he said, meaning that—
"Yet you have drunk with him," Katharine interrupted him hotly. "You have gone hurling through the night with him. You have shamed me together."
"Yet I cannot forget Tully," he answered sardonically, "who warns me that a prudent man should be able to moderate the course of his friendship, even as he reins his horse. Est prudentis sustinere ut cursum." "Mark you that," the old knight said to Katharine. "I will get my boy to read to me out of Tully, for that is excellent wisdom."
"God help me! This is Christendom," Katharine said bitterly. "Shall one abandon one that lay in the same cradle with one?"
"Your ladyship hath borne with him a day too long," Udal said. "He beat me like a dog 5 days since. Have you heard of the city called Ponceropolis, founded by the King Philip? Your good cousin should be ruler of that city, for the great king peopled it with all the brawlers, cutthroats, and roaring boys of his dominions, to be rid of them." She became aware that he was very angry, for his whisper shook like the neigh of a horse. The old knight winked at Margot. "Why, this is a monstrous wise man," he said, "who yet speaks some sense." "In short," the magister said, "if you will stick to this man, you shall lose me, for I have taken beatings and borne no malice, as in the case of men with whose loves or wives I have prospered better than themselves. But that this man should miscall me and beat me for the pure frenzy of his mind, causelessly, and for the love of blows! That is unbearable. To-night I walk for the first time after 5 days since he did beat me, and I ask you, whom you shall here find the better servant?" His thin figure was suddenly shaking with rage. "Why, this is conspiracy!" Katharine cried. "A conspiracy?" Udal's voice rose up into a shriek. "If your ladyship were a queen, I would not be a queen's cousin's whipping post." His arms jerked with the spasms of his rage like those of a marionette. "A shame that learned men should be so beaten," Margot's gruff voice uttered. Katharine turned upon her. "This is what made you speak e'en now. You have been with this flibberty-gibbet." "This is a free land," the girl mumbled, her mild eyes sparkling with the contagious anger of her lover. The old knight stood blinking upon Katharine. "You are like to lose all your servants in this quarrel," he said. Katharine wrung her hands, and then turned her back upon them and drummed upon the table with her fingers. Udal caught Margot's large hand and fumbled it beneath the furs of his robe. The old knight kept his smiling eyes upon Katharine's back. Her voice came at last. "Why, I will not have Tom killed upon this occasion into which I have brought him." Rochford shrugged his shoulders up to his ears. "Oh, marvellous infatuation," he said. Katharine spoke, still with her back turned and her shoulders heaving. "A marvellous infatuation?" she said, her voice coming softly and deeply in her chest. "Why, after his fashion this man loved me. God help us, what other men have I seen here that would strike a straight blow? Here it is moving in the dark, listening at pierced walls, swearing of false treasons." She swept round upon the old man, her face moved, her eyes tender and angry. She stretched out her hand, and her voice was pitiful and urgent. "Sir, sir, what counsel do you give me who are a knight of honour? Would you let a man who lay in the cradle with you go to a shameful death in an errand you had made for him?" She leaned back upon the table, with her eyes upon his face. "No, you would not. How then could you give me such counsel?" He said, "Well, well, you are in the right." "Nearly I went with him to another place," she answered, "but half an hour ago. Would to God I had! For here it is all treacheries." "Write your letter, child," he answered. "You shall give it to Sicily Elliot tomorrow in the morning. I will have it conveyed, but I will not be seen to handle it, for I am too young to be hanged." "Why, God help you, knight," Udal whispered urgently from the doorway. "Carry no letter in this affair. If you escape, assuredly this mad pupil of mine shall die. For the King—" Suddenly he raised his voice to a high nasal drawl that rang out like a jackdaw's. "That is very true, and in this matter of death you may read in Socrates' Apology. Nevertheless, we may believe that if death be a transmigration from one place into another, there is certainly amendment in going whither so many great men have already passed, and to be subtracted from the way of so many judges to be iniquitous and corrupt.' 'Why, what a plague—' Katharine began. He interrupted her quickly. 'Here is your serving man back at last, if you would rate him for leaving your door unkept.' The man stood in the doorway, his lantern dangling in his hand, his cudgel stuck through his belt, his shock of hair rough like an old thatch, and his eyes upon the ground. He mumbled, feeling at his throat. 'A man must eat. I was gone to my supper.' 'You are like to have the nightmare, friend,' the old knight said pleasantly. 'It is ill to eat when most of the world sleeps.' End of section 11. Queen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. The Fifth Queen, by Ford Madox Ford. Part 2, Chapter 5. Cicely Elliot had indeed sent her old knight to Katharine with those overtures of friendship. Careless, dark, and a madcap, she had flown at Katharine because she had believed her a creature of Cromwell's, set to spy upon the Lady Mary's maids. They formed, the 7 of them, a little mutinous babbling circle. Their lady's cause they adored, for it was that of an old faith, such as women will not let die. The Lady Mary treated them with a hard indifference. It was all one to her whether they loved her or not. So they babbled, and told evil tales of the other side. The Lady Rochford could do little to hold them, for having come very near death when the Queen Anne fell, she had been timid ever since, and Cicely Elliot was their ringleader. Thus it was to her that one of Gardiner's priests had come, begging her to deliver to Katharine a copy of the words she was to speak in the masque, and from the priest Cicely had learnt that Katharine loved the old faith and hated Privy Seal as much as any of them. She had been struck with a quick remorse, and had suddenly seen Katharine as one that must be helped and made amends to. Thus she had pinned up her sleeve at Privy Seal's. There, however, it had not been safe to speak with her. "Dear child," she said to Katharine next morning, "we may well be foils one to another, for I am dark and pert, like a pynot. They call me Magpie here. You shall be Jenny Dove of the Sun. But I am not afraid of your looks. Men that like the touch of the sloe in me shall never be drawn away by your sweet lips." She was indeed like a magpie, never still for a minute, fingering Katharine's hair, lifting the medallion upon her chest, poking her dark eyes close to the embroidery on her stomacher. She had a trick of standing with her side face to you, so that her body seemed very long to her hips, and her dark eyes looked at you askance and roguish, whilst her lips puckered to a smile, a little on one side. "It was not your old knight called me sweet lips," Katharine said. "I miscalled him foully last night." Cicely Elliot threw back her head and laughed. "Why, he is worshipful heavy to send on a message, but you may trust his advice when he gives it." "I am come to think the same," Katharine said. "Yet in this one matter I cannot take it." Cicely Elliot had taken to herself the largest and highest of the rooms set apart for the maids. The tapestries, which were her own, were worked in fair reds and greens like flowers. She had a great silver mirror and many glass vases, in which were set flowers worked in silver and enamel, and a large thin box carved out of an elephant's tusk to hold her pins, and all these were presents from the old knight. "Why?" she said. "Sometimes his advice shall fit a woman's mood. Sometimes he goes astray, as is the case of these gloves. Cheverel is a skin that will stretch so that after one wearing you may not tell the thumbs from stocking feet. Nevertheless, I would be rid of your cousin." "Not in this quarrel," Katharine answered. "Find him an honourable errand, and he shall go to Cathay." Cicely threw the stretched cheverel gloves into the fire. "My knight shall give me a dozen pairs of silk, stitched with gold to stiffen them," she said. "You shall have 6. But send your cousin in quest of the Islands of the Blest. They lie well out in the Western Ocean. If you can make him mislay his compass, he will never come back to you." Katharine laughed. "I think he would come without compass or chart.
Nevertheless, I will send me my letter by means of your knight to the Bishop Gardiner.' Cicely Elliot hung her head on her chest. 'I do not ask its contents, but you may give it me.' Katharine brought it out from the bosom of her dress, and the dark girl passed it up her sleeve. 'This shall no doubt ruin you,' she said, 'but get you to our mistress. I will carry your letter.' Katharine started back. 'You?' she said. 'It was Sir Nicholas should have it conveyed.' 'That poor silly old man shall not be hanged in this matter,' Cicely answered. 'It is all one to me. If Crummock would have had my head he could have shortened me by that much a year ago.' Katharine's eyes dilated proudly. 'Give me my letter,' she said. 'I will have no woman in trouble for me.' The dark girl laughed at her. 'Your letter is in my sleeve. No hand shall touch it before mine deliver it to him it is written to. Get you to our mistress. I thank you for an errand I may laugh over. Laughter here is not over mirthful.' She stood side-face to Katharine, her mouth puckered up into her smile, her eyes roguish, her hands clasped behind her back. 'Why, you see Cicely Elliot,' she said, 'whose folk all died after the Marquis of Exeter's rising, who has neither kith nor kin, nor house nor home. I had a man loved me passing well. He is dead with the rest. So I pass my time in pranks because the hours are heavy. To-day the prank is on thy side. Take it as a gift the gods send, for to-morrow I may play thee one, since thou art soft and fair and tender. That is why they call me here the Magpie. My old knight will tell you I have tweaked his nose now and again, but I will not have him shortened by the head for thy sake.' 'Why, you are very bitter,' Katharine said. The girl answered, 'If your head ached as mine does now and again when I remember my men who are dead. If your head ached as mine does....' She stopped and gave a peal of laughter. 'Why, child, your face is like a startled moon. You have not stayed days enough here to have met many like me. But if you tarry here for long you will laugh much as I laugh, or you will have grown blind long since with weeping.' Katharine said, 'Poor child, poor child.' But the girl cried out, 'Get you gone, I say. In the Lady Mary's room you shall find my old knight babbling with the maidens. Send him to me, for my head aches scurvily, and he shall dip his handkerchief in vinegar and set it upon my forehead.' 'Let me comb thy hair,' Katharine said. 'My hand is sovereign against a headache.' 'No, get you gone,' the girl said harshly. 'I will have men of war to do these errands for me.' Katharine answered, 'Sit thee down. Thou wilt take my letter. I must ease thy pains.' 'As like as not I shall scratch thy pink face,' Cicely said. 'At these times I cannot bear the touch of a woman. It was a woman made my father run with the Marquis of Exeter.' 'Sweetheart,' Katharine said softly, 'I could hold both thy wrists with my 2 fingers. I am stronger than most men.' 'Why, no,' the girl cried. 'I may not sit still. Get you gone. I will run upon your errand. If you had knelt to as many men as I have, you could not sit still either. And not one of my men was pardoned.' She ran from the room with a sidelong step like a magpie's, and her laugh rang out discordantly from the corridor. The Lady Mary sat reading her Plautus in her large painted gallery, with all her maids about her sewing, some at a dress for her, some winding silk for their own uses. The old knight stood holding his sturdy hands apart between a rope of wool that his namesake Lady Rochford was making into balls. Other gentlemen were beside some of the maids, toying with their silks or whispering in their ears. No one much marked Katharine Howard. She glided to her lady and kissed the dry hand that lay in the lap motionless. Mary raised her eyes from her book, looked for a leisurely time at the girl's face, and then began again to read. Old Rochford winked pleasantly at her, and after she had saluted his cousin, he begged her to hold the wool in his stead, for his hands, which were used to sword and shield, were very cold, and his legs, inured to the saddle, brooked standing very ill. 'Cicely Elliot hath a headache,' Katharine said. 'She bade me send you to her.' He waited before her, helping her to adjust the wool on to her white hands, and she uttered in a low voice, 'She hath taken my letter for me.'
He said, "Why, what are the plague's name?" and stood fingering his peaked little beard in a gentle perplexity. Lady Rochford pulled at her wool and gave a hissing sigh of pain, for the joint of her wrist was swollen. "It has always been easterly winds in January since the holy blood of Hales was lost," she sighed. "In its day I could get me some ease in the wrist by touching the file that held it." She shivered with discomfort, and smiled distractedly upon Katharine. Her large and buxom face was mild, and she seemed upon the point of shedding tears. "Why, if you will put your wool round a stool, I will wind it for you," Katharine said, because the gentle helplessness of the large woman filled her with compassion, as if this were her old, mild mother. Lady Rochford shook her head disconsolately. "Then I must do something else, and my bones would ache more. But I would you would make my cousin Rochford ask the Archbishop where they have hidden the sacred blood of Hales, that I may touch it and be cured." The old knight frowned very slightly. "I have told thee to wrap thy fist in lamb's wool," he said. "100 times I have told thee. It is very dangerous to meddle with these old saints and files that are done away with." Lady Rochford sighed gently and hung her head. "My cousin Anne, that was a sinful queen, God rest her soul," she began. Sir Nicholas listened to her no more. "See you," he whispered to Katharine, "peradventure it is best that Cicely is gone. Being a madcap, her comings and goings are heeded by no man, and it is true that she resorteth daily to the Bishop of Winchester to plague his priests." "I would not speak so, being a man," Katharine said. He smiled at her and patted her shoulder. "Why, I have struck good blows in my time," he said. "And have learned worldly wisdom," Katharine retorted. "I would not risk my neck on grounds where I am but ill acquainted," he answered soberly. He was all will to please her. The King, he said, was coming on the Wednesday after the Bishop of Winchester's to see 3 new stallions walk in their manage steps. "I pray that you will come with Cicely Elliot to watch from the little window in the stables. These great creatures are a noble sight. I bred them myself to it." His mild brown eyes were bright with enthusiasm and cordiality. Suddenly there was a great silence in the room, and the Lady Mary raised her head. The burly figure of Throckmorton, the spy, was in the doorway. Katharine shuddered at the sight of him, for in her Lincolnshire house, where he was accounted more hateful than Judas who had betrayed the Lord, she had seen him beat the nuns when the convents had been turned out of doors, and he had brought to death his own brother, who had had a small estate near her father's house. The smile upon his face made her feel sick. He stroked his long, golden-brown beard, glanced swiftly around the room, and advanced to the mistress's chair, swinging his great shoulders. He made a leg and pulled off his cap, and at that there was a rustle of astonishment, for it had been held treasonable to cap the Lady Mary. Her eyes regarded him fixedly, with a granite cold and hardness, and he seemed to have at once a grin of power and a shrinking motion of currying favour. He said that Privy Seal begged her leave that her maid Katharine Howard might go to him soon after 1 o'clock. The Lady Mary neither spoke nor moved, but the old knight shrank away from Katharine, and affected to be talking in the ear of Lady Rochford, who went on winding her wool. Throckmorton turned on his heels and swung away, his eyes on the floor, but with a grin on his evil face. He left a sudden whisper behind him, and then the silence fell once more. Katharine stood, a tall figure, holding out the hands on which the wool was as if she were praying to some invisible deity or welcoming some invisible lover. Some heads were raised to look at her, but they fell again. The old knight shuffled nearer to her, to whisper hoarsely from his mustachioed lips, "Your serving man hath reported. Pray God we come safe out of this." Then he went out of the room. Lady Rochford sighed deeply, for no apparent reason. After a time the Lady Mary raised her head and made a minute, cold beckoning to Katharine. Her dry finger pointed to a word in her book of Plautus. "Tell me what you know of this," she commanded. The play was the Menechmi, and the phrase ran, "Nimis autem bene ora comitavi." It was difficult for Katharine to bring her mind down to this text, for she had been wondering if indeed her time were at an end before it had begun. She said, "I have never loved this play very well," to excuse herself. "Then you are out of the fashion?" Mary said coldly, "for this monarchmy is prized here above all the rest, and shall be played at Winchester's before his Highness." Katharine bowed her head submissively, and read the words again. "I remember me," she said. "I had this play in a manuscript, where your comitavi read commentavi." Mary kept her eyes upon the girl's face, and said, "Signifying?" "Why, it signifies," Katharine said, "that Messennio did well mark a face. If you read commentavi, it should mean that he scratched it with his nails, so that it resembled a harrowed field; if commentavi, that he bethumped it with his fist, so that bruises came out like the stops on a fair writing." "It is true that you are a good Latinist," Mary said expressionlessly. "Bring me my inkhorn to that window. I will write down your commentavi." Katharine lifted the inkhorn from its hole in the arm of the chair, and gracefully followed the stiff and rigid figure into the embrasure of a distant window. Mary bent her head over the book that she held in her hand, and writing in the margin, she uttered, "Pity that such an excellent Latinist should meddle in matters that nothing concern her." Katharine held the inkhorn carefully, as if it had been a precious vase. "If you will bid me do naught but serve you, I will do naught else," she said. "I will neither bid thee nor aid thee," Mary answered. "The Bishop of Winchester claims thy service. Serve him as thou wilt." "I would serve my mistress in serving him," Katharine said. "He is a man I love little." Mary pulled suddenly from her bodice a piece of crumpled parchment that had been torn across. She thrust it into Katharine's free hand. "Such letters I have had written me by my father's men," she said. "If this bishop should come to be my father's man, I would take no service from him." Katharine read on the crumpled parchment such words as, "Be you dutiful. I will not protect. You shall be ruined utterly. You had better creep underground. Therefore humble you." "It was Thomas Cromwell that wrote that," the Lady Mary cried. "My father's man." "But if this brewer's son be brought down," Katharine pleaded. "Why, I tore his letter across, for it is filthy," Mary said, "and I keep the halves of his letter that I may remember. If he be brought down, who shall bring his master down, that let him write so?" Katharine said, "If this tempter of the devil's brood were brought down, there should ensue so great an atonement from his sorrowful master, whom he deludes." Mary uttered a "Tush!" of scorn and impatience. "This is the babbling of a child. My father is no holy innocent, as you and your like feign to believe." "Nevertheless, I love you most well," Katharine pleaded. Mary snapped her book to. Her cold tone came back over her heat as the grey clouds of a bitter day shut down again upon a dangerous flicker of lightning. "Do as you will," she said. "Only if your head fall, I will stir no finger to aid you. Or if by these plottings my father could be got to send me his men upon their knees and bearing crowns, I would turn my back upon them and say no word." "Well, my plottings are like to end full soon," Katharine said. "Privy Seal hath sent for me upon no pleasant errand." Mary said, "God help you," with a frigid unconcern, and walked back to her chair. End of Section 12. Of the Fifth Queen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. The Fifth Queen, by Ford Madox Ford. Part 2, Chapter 6. Cromwell kept as a rule his private courts either in his house at Austin Friars or in a larger one that he had near the Rolls. But when the King was as far away from London as Greenwich, or when such ill-wishers as the Duke of Norfolk were in the King's neighbourhood, Cromwell never slept far out of earshot from the King's rooms. It was said, indeed, that never once since he had become the King's man had he passed a day without seeing his Highness once at least, or writing him a great letter. But he contrived continually to send the nobles that were against him upon errands at a distance, as when Bishop Gardiner was made ambassador to Paris, or Norfolk sent to put down the North after the Pilgrimage of Grace. Such errands served a double purpose. Gardiner, acting under the pressure of the King, was in Paris forced to make enemies of many of his foreign friends, and the Duke,
in his panic-stricken desire to curry favour with Henry, had done more harrying, hanging, and burning among the Papists than ever Henry or his minister would have dared to command, for in those northern parts the king's writ did not run freely. Thus, in spite of himself, the Duke at York had been forced to hold the country whilst creatures of Privy Seal, men of the lowest birth and of the highest arrogance, had been made wardens of the marches and filled the councils of the borders. Such men, with others, like the judges and proctors of the Court of Augmentations, which Cromwell had invented to administer the estates of the monasteries and his cheated lords' lands, with a burgess or two from the shires and Parliament, many lawyers and some suppliants of rank, filled the anterooms of Privy Seal. There was a matter of 200 of them, mostly coming not upon any particular business, so much as that any enemies they had who should hear of their having been there might tremble the more. Cromwell himself was in the room that had the King and Queen's heads on the ceiling and the tapestry of Diana hunting. He was speaking with a great violence to Sir Leonard Ughtred, whose sister-in-law, the widow of Sir Anthony Ughtred and sister of the Queen Jane, his son Gregory had married 2 years before. It was a good match, for it made Cromwell's son the uncle of the Prince of Wales, but there had been a trouble about their estates ever since. "Sir," Cromwell threatened the knight, "Gregory, my son, was ever a fool. If he be content that you have Hyde Farm, that am not I. His wife may twist him to consent, but I will not suffer it." Ughtred hung his head, which was closely shaved, and fingered his jewelled belt. "It is plain justice," he muttered. "The farm was ceded to my brother after Hyde Monastery was torn down. It was to my brother, not to my brother's wife, who is now your son's." Cromwell turned upon the Chancellor of the Augmentations, who stood in the shadow of the tall mantelpiece. He was twisting his fingers in his thin grey beard that wagged tremulously when he spoke. "Truly," he bleated piteously, "it stands in the register of the Augmentations as the worshipful knight says." Cromwell cried out in a studied rage, "I made thee, and I made thy office. I will unmake the one and the other, if it and thou know no better law." "God help me!" the Chancellor gasped. He shrank again into the shadow of the chimney, and his blinking eyes fell upon Cromwell's back with a look of dread and the hatred of a beast that is threatened at the end of its hole. "Sir," Cromwell frowned darkly upon Ughtred, "the law stands thus if the Augmentation people know it not. This farm and others were given to your late brother upon his marriage, that the sister of the Queen might have a proper state. The statute of uses hath here no say. Understand me. It was the King's to give. It is the King's still." He opened his mouth so wide that he appeared to bellow. "That farm falleth to the survivor of those two, who is now my son's wife. What judge shall gainsay that?" He swayed his body round on his motionless and sturdily planted legs, veering upon the Chancellor and the knight in turn, as if he challenged them to gainsay him who had been an attorney for 10 years after he had been a wool merchant. Ughtred shrugged his shoulders heavily, and the Chancellor hastened to bleat, "No judge shall gainsay your lordship. Your lordship hath an excellent knowledge of the law." "Why hast thou not as good a one?" Cromwell rated him. "I made thee since I thought thou hadst." The Chancellor choked in his throat and waved his hands. "Thus the law is," Cromwell said to Ughtred, "and if it were not so Parliament should pass an Act to make it. For it is a scandal that a Queen's sister, an aunt of the Prince that shall be King, should lose her lands upon the death of her husband. It savours of treason that you should ask it. I have known men go to the Tower upon less occasion." "Well, I am a broken man," Sir Leonard muttered. "Why, God help you," Cromwell said. "Get you gone. The law takes no account of whether a man be broken, but seeketh to do honour to the King's Highness and to render justice." Viridus and Sadler, who was another of Cromwell's secretaries, had come in whilst Privy Seal had been speaking, and Cromwell turned upon them, laughing as the knight went out, his head hanging. "Here is another broken man," he said, and they all laughed together. "Well, he is another very notable swordsman," Viridus said. "We might well post him at Milan,
lest Pole flee back to Rome that way.'
Cromwell turned upon the Chancellor with a bitter contempt.
'Find thou for this knight some monk's lands in Kent. He shall to Milan with them for a price.'
Viridus laughed.
'Now we shall soon have those broken swordsmen in every town of Italy between France and Rome. Such a net Pole shall not easily break through.' 'It were well he were done with soon,' Cromwell said. 'The King shall love us much the more, and it is time.' 'Why, there will be in 2 days such a clamour of assassins in Paris that he shall soon boat from there towards Rome,' Viridus answered. 'It will go hard if he escape all our Italy men. I hold it for certain that Winchester shall have reported to him in Paris that this Culpepper is on the road. Will you speak with this Howard wench?'
Cromwell knitted his brows in uncertainty.
'It was her cousin that should clamour about this murder in Paris,' Viridus reminded him. 'Is she without?' Cromwell asked. 'Have you it for certain that she hath reported to my Lord of Winchester?' 'Winchester's priest of the bedchamber hath shown me a copy of the letter she wrote. I would have your lordship send some reward to that Father Michael. He hath served us in many other matters.'
Cromwell motioned with his hand that Sadler should note down this Father Michael's name.
'Are there many men in my antechambers?' he asked Viridus,
and hearing that there were more than 150,
'Why, let this wench stay there half an hour. It humbles a woman to be alone among so many men, and she shall come here without a sound clout to her back for the crush of them.'
He began talking with Sadler about 2 globes of the world that he had ordered his agent to buy in Antwerp, one for himself and the other for a present to the King. Sadler answered that the price was very high, 1,000 crowns or so, he had forgotten just how many. They had been 12 years in the making, but the agent had been afraid of the greatness of the expense. Cromwell said, 'Tush! I must have the best of these Flemish furnishings.' He signed to Viridus to send for Katharine Howard, and went on talking with Sadler about the furnishing of his house in the Austin Friars. He had his agents all over Flanders watching the noted masters of the crafts to see what notable pieces they might turn out. For he loved fine carvings, noble hangings, great worked chests and other signs of wealth, and the money was never thrown away, for the wood and the stuffs and the gold thread remained so long as you kept the moth and the woodlouse from them. To the King, too, he gave presents every day. Katharine entered by a door from a corridor at which he had not expected her. She wore a great headdress of net like the Queen's, and her dress was in no disarray, neither were her cheeks flushed by anything more than apprehension. She said that she had been shown that way by a large gentleman with a great beard. She would not bring herself to mention the name of Throckmorton, so much she detested him. Cromwell answered with a benevolent smile, 'Aye, Throckmorton ever had an eye for beauty. Otherwise you had come scurvily out of that wash.' He twisted his mouth up as if he were mocking her, and asked her suddenly how the Lady Mary corresponded with her cousin the Emperor, for it was certain she had a means of writing to him. Katharine flushed all over her face with relief, and her heart stilled itself a little. Here at least there was no talk of the Tower at once for her, because she had written a letter to Bishop Gardiner. She answered that that day for the first time she had been in the Lady Mary's service. He smiled benevolently still, and holding out a hand in a little warning gesture and with an air of pleasant reasonableness, said that she must earn her bread like other folks in his Highness's service. 'Why,' she answered, 'I have been marvellous ill, but I shall be more diligent in serving my mistress.' He marked a distinction, pointing a fat finger at her heart-place. In the serving of her mistress she should not do enough work to pay for bodkins nor for sewing silk, since the Lady Mary asked nothing of her maids, neither their attendance, their converse, nor yet their needlework. Such a place asked nothing of one so fortunate as to fill it. To atone for it, the service of the King demanded her labours. 'Why,' she said again, 'if I must spy in those parts, it is a great pity that I ever came there as your woman. For who there shall open their hearts to me?' He laughed at her comfortably still. 'You may put it about that you hate me,' he said. 'You may mix with them that love me not. In the end you may worm yourself into their secrets.' Again a heavy flush covered Katharine's face from the chin to the brow. It was so difficult for her to keep from speaking her mind with her lips that she felt as if her whole face must be telling the truth to him. But he continued to shake his plump sides as if he were uttering inaudible ho-ho-ho's. "That is so easy," he said. "A child, I think, should compass it." He put his hands behind his back and stretched his legs apart. She was very pleasant to look at with her flushings, and it amused him to toy with frightened women. "It is in this way that you shall earn his Highness's bread." It was known that Mary had this treasonable correspondence with the Emperor. In the devilish malignancy of her heart she desired that her sacred father should be cast down and slain, and continually she implored her cousin to invade her father's dominions, she sending him maps, plans of the new castles in building and the names of such as were malevolent within the realm. "Therefore," he finished, "if you could discover her channels, and those channels could then be stopped up, you would indeed both earn your bread and enter into high favour." He began again good-humouredly to give her careful directions as to how she should act, as, for instance, by offering to make for the printers a fair copy of the Lady Mary's commentary upon Plautus. By pretending that certain words were obscure to her, she should find opportunities for coming suddenly into the room, and she should afford herself excuses for searching among his mistress's papers without awakening suspicions. "Well, my face is too ingenuous," Katharine said. "I am not made for playing the spy." He laughed at her. "That is so much the better," he said. "The best spies are those that have open countenances. It needs but a little schooling." "I should get me a hang-dog look very soon," she answered. She paused for a minute and then spoke earnestly, holding out her hands. "I would you would set me a nobler task. Very surely it is shameful that a daughter should so hate the father that begat her, and I know the angels weep to see her desire that the great and noble prince should be cast down and slain by his enemies. But, sir, it were the better task to seek to soften her mind. Such knowledge as I have of goodly writers should aid me rather to persuade her heart towards her father. For I know no text that should make me skilful as a spy, but I can give you a dozen from Plautus alone that do inculcate a sweet and dutiful love from daughter to sire." He leered at her pleasantly. "Why, you speak sweetly, by the book. If the Lady Mary were a man, now—" The hitherto silent men laid back their heads to laugh, and the Chancellor of the Augmentation suddenly rubbed his palms together, hissing like an ostler. But seeing her look became angry and abashed, Cromwell stopped his sentence and once more held out a finger. "Why, indeed," he said gravely. "If you could do that, you might be the first lady in the land. For neither the King nor I, nor yet all nor many, have availed there." Katharine said, "Surely there is a way to touch the heart of this noble lady, and by long seeking I may find." "Well, you have spoken many words," Cromwell said. "This is a great matter. If you shall achieve it, it shall be accounted to you both here and in heaven. But the other task I enjoin upon you." She was making sorrowfully to the door, and he called to her. "I have found your cousin employment." The sudden mention made her stop as if she had been struck in the face, and she held her hand to her side. Her face was distorted with fear as she turned to answer. "Aye, I know. He hath told me. But I cannot thank you. I would not that my cousin should murder a prince of the Church." She knew, from the feeling in her heart and the cruel sound of his voice, that he had that knowledge already. If he wished to imprison her, it could serve no turn to fence about that matter, and she steadied herself by catching hold of the tapestry with one hand behind her back. The faces of Cromwell's 3 assistants were upon her, hard, sardonic, and grinning. Viridus said with an air of parade, "I had told your lordship that this lady had flaws in her loyalty." And the Chancellor was raising his hands in horror, after the fashion of a Greek chorus. Cromwell, however, still grinned at her. "When the Queen Katharine died," he said slowly, "it was a great relief to this realm. When the late arch-devil, Pope Clement, died, the King and I were mad with joy. But if all popes and all hostile queens and princes could be stricken with devils and dead to-morrow,
His Highness would rather it were Reginald Pole.' Katharine understood very well that he was setting before her the enormity of her offence. She stood still with her lips parted. He went on rehearsing the crimes of the cardinal: how he had been educated by the King's high bounty, how the King had offered him the Archbishopric of York, how he had rather fled to the Bishop of Rome, how he had written a book accusing the King of such crimes and heresies that all Christendom had cried out upon his Highness. Even then this Pole was in Paris with a bull from the Bishop of Rome calling upon the Emperor and the King of France to fall together upon their lord. Katharine gasped. 'I would well he were dead, but not by my cousin. They should take my cousin and slay him.' Cromwell had arranged this scene very carefully, for his power over the King fell away daily, and that day he had had to tell Baumbach, the Saxish ambassador, that there was no longer any hope of the King's allying himself with the Schmalkner League. Therefore he was the more hot to discover a new Papist treason. The suggestion of Viridus that Katharine might be made either to discover or to invent one had filled him with satisfaction. There was no one who could be more believed if she could be ground down into swearing away the life of her uncle or any other man of high station. And to grind her down thus needed only many threats. He infused gradually more terror into his narrow eyes, and spoke more gravely. 'Neither do I desire the death of this traitor so hotly as doth his Highness. For there be these foul lies, and have you not heard the ancient fool's prophecy that was made over 30 years ago, that one with a red cap brought up from low degree should rule all the land under the King? I trow ye know who that was. And that after much mixing the land should by another red cap be reconciled or else brought to utter ruin?' 'I am new to this place,' Katharine said. 'I never heard that saying. God help me, I wish this man were dead.' His voice grew the more deep as he saw that she was the more daunted. 'Aye, and whether the land be reconciled to the Bishop of Rome or be brought to utter ruin, the one and the other signify the downfall of his Highness.' The Chancellor interrupted piously. 'God save us! Whither should we all flee then?' 'It is not,' Viridus commented dryly, 'that his Highness or my lord here do feel a fool prophecy made by a drunken man. But then there being such a prophecy running up and down the land, and such a malignant and devilish red cap ranting up and down the world, the hearts of foolish subjects are made to turn.' 'Idiot wench!' the Chancellor suddenly yelped at her. 'Ignorant, naughty harlot! You had better have died than have uttered those your pretty words.' 'Why,' Cromwell said gently, 'I am very sure that now you desire that your cousin should slay this traitor.' He paused, licked his lips and held out a hand. 'Upon your life,' he barked, 'tell no one this secret.' The faces of all 4 men were again upon her, sardonic, leering and amused, and suddenly she felt that this was not the end of the matter. There was something untrue in this parade of threats. Cromwell was acting. They were all acting parts. Their speeches were all too long, too dryly spoken. They had been rehearsed. This was not the end of the matter, and neither her cousin nor Cardinal Pole here were the main point. She wondered for a wild moment if Cromwell too, like Gardiner, thought that she had a voice with the King. But Cromwell knew as well as she that the King had seen her but once for a minute, and he was not a fool like Gardiner to run his nose into a mare's nest. 'There is no power upon earth could save you from your doom if through you this matter miscarried,' he said softly. 'Therefore, be you very careful. Act as I would have you act. Seek out that secret that I would know.' It came irresistibly into Katharine's head. 'These men know already very well that I have written to Bishop Gardiner. This is to hold a halter continuously above my head.' Then at least they did not mean to do away with her instantly. She dropped her eyes upon the ground and stood submissively, whilst Privy Seal's voice came cruel and level. 'You are a very fair wench, made for love and such stuff. You are an indifferent good Latinist who might offer good counsel. But be you very careful that you come not against me. You should not escape, but may burrow underground sooner than that. Your Aristotle should not help you, nor Lucretius, nor Lucan, nor Silius Italicus. Diodorus Siculus hath no maxim that should help you against me. But, like Diodorus the dialectician, you should die of shame. Seneca shall help you if you but dally with that fool Thought who saith, Quieris quo jaciis post obitum loco, quo non nata jacent. Ay, thou shalt die and lie in an unknown grave as thou hadst never been born. She went, her knees trembling half with fear and half with rage, for it was impossible to imagine anything more threatening or more arrogant than his soft, cruel voice, that seemed to sound for long after in her ears, saying, I have you at my mercy. See you do all as I have bidden you. Watching the door that closed upon her, Viridus said with a negligent amusement, That fool Udal hath set it all about that your lordship designed her for the recreation of his highness. Why, Cromwell answered with his motionless smile of contempt for his fellow men, it is well to offer bribes to fools and threats to knaves. The Chancellor bleated with amazed adulation, Marvel that your lordship should give so much care to such a worthless rag. An I had never put my heart into trifles, I had never stood here, Cromwell snarled at him. Would that my knaves ever would come to learn that. He spoke again to Viridus. See that this wench come never near his highness. I like not her complexion. Well, we may clap her up at any moment, his man answered. End of Section 13.
Fifth Queen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. The Fifth Queen, by Ford Madox Ford. Part 2, Chapter 7. The King came to the revels at the Bishop of Winchester's, for these two were given in honour of the Queen, and he had altered in his mind to let the Emperor and Francis know that he was inclined to weaken his new alliances. Besides, there was the newest suitor for the hand of the Lady Mary, the young Duke Philip of Wittelsbach, who must be shown how great were the resources of the land. Young, gay, dark, a famous warrior and a good Catholic, he sat behind the Queen, and speaking German of a sort, he made her smile at times. The play was the Menechmi of Plautus, and Duke Philip interpreted it to her. She seemed at times so nearly human that the King, glancing back over his shoulder to note whether she disgraced him, could settle down into his chair and rest both his back and his misgivings. Seeing the frown leave his brow, all the courtiers grew glad behind him. Cromwell talked with animation to Baumbach, the ambassador from the Schmalkaldner League, since he had not seen the King so gay for many days, and Gardiner in his bishop's robes smiled with a black pleasure because his feast was so much more prosperous than Privy Seal's had been. There was no one there of the Lady Mary's household, because it was not seemly that she should be where her suitor was before he had been presented to her. The large hall was lit with tapers at dusk and hung with ivy and with holly. Dried woodruff, watermint, and other sweet herbs were scattered about the floors to give an agreeable odour. The antlers of deer from the Bishop's Chase in Winchester were like a forest of dead boughs, branching from the walls, some gilded, some silvered, some supporting shields emblazoned with the arms of the see, of the Bishop, of the King, or of Cleves. An army of wood-pigeons and stock-doves with silver collars about their necks was at one time let fly into the hall, and the swish of their wings and afterwards their cooing among the golden rafters of the high ceiling made pleasing sounds, and mingled with the voices of sweet singing from the galleries at each end of the hall near the roof. The players spoke their parts bravely, and because this play was beloved among all others at the court, there was a great and general contentment. For the after scene they had a display of theology. There were 3 battles of men. In black with red hats, horns branching above them, and in the centre a great devil with a triple tiara, who danced holding up an enormous key. These stood on the right. On the left were priests in fustian, holding enormous flagons of Rhenish wine and dancing in a drunken measure with their arms round more drunken doxies dressed like German women. In the centre stood grave and reverend men wearing horsehair beards and the long gowns of English bishops and priests. Before these there knelt an angel in flame-coloured robes with wings like the rainbow. The angel supported a great volume on the back of which might be read in letters of gold, Regis Nostri Sapientia. The great devil, dancing forward, brandishing his key, roared that these reverend men should kneel to him. He held out a cloven foot and bade them kiss it. But a venerable bishop cried out, "You be Antichrist. I know you. You be the arch-devil. But from this book I will confound you. Thank God that we have one that leads us aright." Coming forward, he read in Latin from the book of the King's wisdom, and the great devil fell back fainting into the arms of the men in red hats. The King called out, "By God, Goodman Bishop, you have spoken well," and the court roared. Then one from the other side danced out, holding his flagon and grasping his fat wife round the waist. He sang in a gross and German way, smacking his lips, that these reverend Englishmen should leave their godly ways and come down among the Lutherans. But the old bishop cried out, "Ay, Dr. Martinus, I know thee. Thou despisest the body of God. Thou art a fornicator. God forbid that our English priest should go among women as ye do. Listen to wisdom. For, thank God, we have one to lead us aright." These words spread a sudden shiver into the hall, for no man there knew whether the King had commanded them to be uttered. The King sat back in his chair, half frowning. Anne blinked. Philip of Wittelsbach laughed aloud. The Catholic ambassadors, Chapuis and Marillac, who had fidgeted in their seats as if they would leave the hall, now leant forward. "Aye," the player bishop called out, "our goodly Queen cometh from a court that was never yet joined to your Schmalkaldners, nor to them that go by your name, Dr. Martinus, thou lecher. Here in England thou shalt find no heresies but the pure and purged word of God." Chapuis bent an aged white hand behind his ear to miss no word. His true and smiling face blinked benevolently. Cromwell smiled too, licking his lips dangerously. Baumbach, the Schmalkaldner, understanding nothing, rolled his German blue eyes in his great head like a pink baby's, and tried to catch the attention of Cromwell, who talked over his shoulder to one of his men. But the many Lutherans that were in the hall scowled at the floor. The player bishop was reading thunderous words of the King, written many years before, against married priests. Henry sat back in his round chair, grasping the arms with his enormous hands. "Why, Master Bishop," he called out. The player stopped his reading and looked at the King, his air of austerity never leaving him. Henry, however, waved his hand and said no more. This dreadful incident caused a confusion in the players. They faltered. The player Lutheran slunk back to his place with his wife, and all of them stood with their heads hanging down. They consulted among themselves and at last filed out from the room, leaving the stage for some empty minutes bare and menacing. Men held their breath. The King was seen to be frowning. But a quick music was played from the galleries and a door opened behind. There came in many figures in white to symbolify the deities of ancient Greece and Rome, and in black, with ashes upon her head, there was Ceres lamenting that Persephone had been carried into the realms of Pluto. No green thing should blow or grow upon this earth, she wailed in a deep and full voice, until her daughter trod again there. The other deities covered their heads with their white skirts. No one heeded this show very much in the hall, for the whispers over what had gone before never subsided again that day. Men turned their backs upon the stage in order to talk with others behind them, and it was generally agreed that if this refurbishing of old doctrines were no more than a bold stroke of Bishop Gardiner's, Henry at least had not scowled very harshly upon it. So that, for the most part, they thought that the old faith might come back again, whilst others suddenly remembered, much more clearly than before, that Cleves was a principality not truly Lutheran, and that the marriage with Anne had not tied them at all to the Schmalkaldners' League. Therefore this shadow of the old ways caused new uneasiness,
for there was hardly any man there that had not some of the monastery lands. The King was the man least moved in the hall. He listened to the lamentations of Mother Ceres, and gazed at a number of naked boys who issued suddenly from the open door. They spread green herbs in a path from the door to the very feet of Anne, who blinked at them in amazement, and they paid no heed to Mother Ceres, who asked indignantly how any green thing could grow upon the earth that she had bidden lie barren till her daughter came again. Persephone stood framed in the doorway. She was all in white, very slim and tall. In among her hair she had a wreath of green Egyptian stones called feridets, of which many remained in the treasuries of Winchester, because they were soft and of so little value that the visitors of the monasteries had left them there. And she had these green feridets cut like leaves, worked into the white lawn over her breasts. In her left arm there lay a cornucopia filled with gold coins, and in her right a silver coronet of olive leaves. She moved in a slow measure to the music, bending her knees to right and to left, drawing her long dress into white lines and curves, until she stood in the centre of the green path. She smiled patiently and with a rapt expression, as if she had come out of a dream. The wreath of olive leaves, she said, the gods sent to their most virtuous, most beauteous queen, who had brought peace in England. The cornucopia filled with gold was the offering of Plutus to the noble and benevolent king of these parts. Her words could hardly be heard for the voices of the theologians in the hall before her. Henry suddenly turned back, lifted his hand and shouted, "Be silent!" Persephone's voice became very audible in the midst of the terrified hush of all these people, who feared their enormous king as if he were a wild beast that at one moment you could play with and the next struck you dead. "How happy is England among the nations!" The voice rang out clear and fluting like a boy's. "Her people how free and bold! Her laws how gentle and beneficent! Her nobles how courteous and sweet in their communings together for the public weal! How thrice happy that land when peace is upon the earth! Her women how virtuous! Her husbandmen how satiated! Her cattle how they let down their milk!" She swayed round to the gods that were uncovering their heads behind her. "Ay, my masters and fellow godsheads, woe is me that we never knew this happy and contented country. Better it had been there to dwell than upon high Olympus. Better than in the Cyclades, better than in the islands of the blest, than hide amid the Bermoothian tempest. Woe is me!" Her expression grew more rapt. She paused as if she had lost the thread of the words, and then spoke again, gazing far out over the hall as jugglers do in performing feats of balancing. "For surely we had been more safe than reigning alone above the clouds had we lived here, the veriest hinds, beneath a king that is 5 times blessed, in that he is a most wealthy and generous of rewards, most noble of courage, most eloquent, most learned in the lore of men, and most high interpreter of the lore of God." Seeing that the king smiled, as though he had received a just panegyric, a great clamour of applause went up in the hall, and swaying beneath the weight of the cornucopia, she came to the king over the path of green herbs and boughs. Henry reached out his hands himself to take his present, smiling and genial, and that alone was a sign of great favour, for by rights she should have knelt with it, offered it and then receded, giving it into the arms of a serving-man. She passed on, and would have crowned the Queen with the silver wreath, but the great hood that Anne wore stood in the way, therefore she laid it in the Queen's lap. Henry caught at her hanging sleeve. "That was a fine gay speech," he said. "I will have it printed." Little ripples of fear and coldness ran over her, for her dress was thin and her arms bared between the loops above. Her eyes roved round upon the people, as if, tall and white, she were a Christian virgin in the agonies of martyrdom. She tried to pull her sleeve from between his great fingers, and she whispered in a sort of terror, "You stay the masque." He lay back in his chair, laughing so that his grey beard shook. "Why, thou art a pert baggage," he said. "I could stay their singing for good, and I would." He looked her up and down, commanding and good-humouredly malicious. She put her hand to her throat as if it throbbed, and uttered with a calmness of desperation, "That were great pity. They have practised much, and their breaths are passable sweet. The godheads with their beards of tow, their lyres and thunderbolts all gilt, stood in an awkward crescent, their music having stopped. Henry laughed at them. "I know thy face," he said. "It would be less than a king to forget it."
"I am Katharine Howard," she faltered, stretching out her hands beseechingly. "Let me go back to my place."
"Oh, ay," he answered. "But thou'st shed thy rags since I saw thee on a mule." He loosed her sleeve. "Let the good men sing a God's name." In her relief to be free, she stumbled on the sweet herbs. It was a dark night into which they went out from the bishop's palace. Cressets flared on his river steps, and there were torches down the long garden for those who went away by road. Because there would be a great crowd of embarkers at the bishop's landing place, so that there might be many hours to wait until their barge should come, Katharine, by the office of old Sir Nicholas, had made a compact with some of the maids of honour of the Lady Elizabeth. A barge was to wait for them at the Cross Keys, a common stage some 10 minutes down the river. Katharine, laughing, gay with relief and gladdened with words of praise, held Margot's hand tight and kept her fingers on Sir Nicholas's sleeve. It was raining a fine drizzle, so that the air of the gardens smelt moist, even against the odour of the torches. The old knight pulled the hood of his gown up over his head, for he was hoarse with a heavy cold. It was pitch black beyond the gatehouse. In the open fields before the wall, torches here and there appeared to burn in mid-air, showing beneath them the heads and the hoods of their bearers hurrying home, and, where they turned to the right along a narrow lane, a torch showed far ahead above a crowd packed thick between dark house-fronts and gables. They glistened with wet and sent down from their gutters spouts of water that gleamed, catching the light of the torch, like threads of opal fire on the pallid dove-colour of the towering house-fronts. The torch went round a corner, its light withdrew along the walls by long jumps as its bearer stepped into the distance ahead. Then it was all black. Walking was difficult over the immense cobbles of the roadway, but in the pack of the crowd it was impossible to fall, for people held one another. But it was also impossible to speak, and, muffling her face in her hood, Katharine walked smiling and squeezing Margot's hand out of pure pleasure with the world that was so fair in the midst of this blackness and this heavy cold. There was a swishing repeated 3 times and 3 thuds and twists of white on heads and shoulders just before her. Undistinguishable yells of mockery dwindled down from high above, and a rushlight shone at an immense elevation, illuminating a faint square of casement that might have been in the heavens. 3 apprentices had thrown down paper bags of powdered chalk. The men who had been struck, and several others who had been maltreated on former nights, or who resented this continual prentice scandal, began a frightful outcry at the door of the house. More bags came bursting down, and foul water. The yells and battle cries rolled in the narrow space under the house-fronts that nearly kissed each other high overhead, and the crowd, brought to a standstill, swayed and pushed against the walls. Katharine lost her hold of the old knight's sleeve, and she could see no single thing. She felt round her in the blackness for his arm, but a heavy man stumbled against her. Suddenly his hand was under her arm, drawing her a little. His voice seemed to say, "Down this gully is a way about." In the passage it was blacker than the mouth of hell, and her eyes still seemed to have in them the dazzle of light and triumph she had just left. There was a frightful stench of garbage, and it appeared to be a vault, because the outcry of the men besieging the door volleyed and echoed the more thunderously. There came the sharp click of a latch, and Katharine found herself impelled to descend several steps into a blackness from which came up a breath of closer air and a smell of rotting straw. Fear suddenly seized upon her, and the conviction that another man had taken the place of the old knight during the scuffle. But a heavy pressure of an arm was suddenly round her waist, and she was forced forward. She caught a shriek from Margot. The girl's hand was torn from her own, a door slammed behind, and there was a deep silence in which the heavy breathing of a man became audible. "If you cry out," a soft voice said, "I will let you go. But probably you will lose your life." She had not a breath at all in her, but she gasped, "Will you do a rape?" and fumbled in her pocket for her crucifix.
Her voice came back to her, muffled and close, so that she was in a very small cellar.
"When you have seen my face you may love me,"
came to her ears in an inane voice.
"I would you might, for you have a goodly mouth for kisses."
She breathed heavily. The click of the beads on her cross filled the silence. She fitted the bar of the crucifix to her knuckles, and felt her breath come calmer. For if the man struck a light, she could strike him in the face with the metal of her cross, held in the fist. She could blind him if she hit an eye. She stepped back a little and felt behind her the damp stone of a wall. The soft voice uttered more loudly: "I offer you a present of great price. I can solve your perplexities." Katharine breathed between her teeth and said nothing. "But if you draw a knife," the voice went on, "I will set you loose. There are as good as Madam Howard." On the door there came the sound of soft thuds. "That is your maid, Margot Poins," the voice said. "You had better bid her begone. This is a very evil gully. She will be strangled." Katharine called, "Go and fetch some one to break down this door." The voice commented, "In the city she will find none to enter this gully. It is a sanctuary of outlaws." There was the faintest glimmer of a casement square, high up before Katharine. Violence and carryings off were things familiar to her imagination. 100 men might have desired her whilst she stood on high in the masque. She said hotly, "If you will hold me here for a ransom, you will find none to pay it." She heard the soft hiss of a laugh, and the voice: "I would myself pay more than other men, but I would have no man see us together." She shrank into herself and held to the wall for comfort. She heard a click, and in the light of a shower of brilliant sparks was the phantom of a man's beard and dim walls. One tiny red glow remained in the tinder, like an illuminant in a black nothingness. He seemed to hold it about breast high and to pause.
"You had best be rid of Margot Poins,"
the musing voice came out of the thick air.
"Send her back to her mother's people. She gets you no friends."
Katharine wondered if she might strike about 18 inches above the tiny spark, or if in these impenetrable shadows there were a very tall man.
"Your Margot's folk miscall you in shameful terms. I would be your servant. But it is distasteful to a proper man to serve one that hath about her an atmosphere of lewdness."
Katharine cursed at him to relieve the agony of her fear. The voice answered composedly:
"One greater than the devil is my master. But it is good hearing that you are loyal to them that serve you. So you shall be loyal to me, for I will serve you well."
The spark in the tinder moved upwards. The man began to blow on it. In the dim glimmer there appeared red lips, a hairy moustache, a straight nose, gleaming eyes that looked across the flame, a high narrow forehead, and the gleam of a jewel in a black cap. This glowing and dusky face appeared to hang in the air. Katharine shrank with despair and loathing. She had seen enough to know the man. She made a swift step towards it, her arm drawn back, but the glow of the box moved to one side, the ashes faded, there was already nothing before she could strike.
"You see I am Throckmorton, a goodly knight," the voice said, laughing.
This man came from Lincolnshire, near her own home. He had been the brother of a gentleman who had a very small property, and he had had one sister. God alone knew for what crime his father had cursed Throckmorton and left his patrimony to the monks at Ely, but his sister had hanged herself. Throckmorton had disappeared. In that black darkness she had seemed to feel his gloating over her helplessness, and his laughing over all the villainies of his hateful past. He was so loathsome to her that merely to be near him had made her tremble, when the day before he had fawned over her and shown her the side door to Privy Seal's room. Now the sound of his breathing took away all her power to breathe. She panted, "Infamous dog! I will have you shortened by the head for this rape."
"It is true I am a fool to play cat and mouse," he answered. "But I was ever thus from a child. I have played silly pranks. Listen to gravity. I bring you here because I would speak to you where no ear dare come to listen. This is a sanctuary of night robbers."
His voice took on fantastically and grotesquely the nasal tones of doctors of logic when they discuss abstract theses.
I am a bold man to dare come here, but some of these are in my pay. Nevertheless, I am a bold man, though indeed the step from life into death is so short and so easily passed that a man is a fool to fear it. Nevertheless, some do fear it. Therefore, as men go, I am bold. Though, since I set much store in the intervention of the saints on my behalf, maybe I am not so bold. Yet I am a good man, or the saints would not protect me. On the other hand, I am fain to do their work for them. So maybe they would protect me whether I were virtuous or no. Maybe they would not, however, for it is a point still disputed as to whether a saint might use an evil tool to do good work. But in short, I am here to tell you what Privy Seal would have of you.'
'God help the pair of you,' Katharine said. 'Have ye descended to cellar work now?'
'Madam Howard,' the voice came, 'for what manner of man do you take me? I am a very proper man that do love virtue. There are few such philosophers as I since I came out of Italy.' It was certain to her now that Privy Seal, having seen her thick with the Bishop of Winchester, had delivered her into the hands of this vulture.
'If you have a knife,' she said, 'put it into me soon. God will look kindly on you, and I would pardon you half the crime.'
She closed her eyes and began to pray. 'Madam Howard,' he answered in a lofty tone of aggrievement, 'the door is on the latch. The latch is at your hand to be found for a little fumbling. Get you gone if you will not trust me.'
'Aye, you have cut-throats without,' Katharine said.
She prayed in silence to Mary and the saints to take her into the kingdom of heaven with a short agony here below. Nevertheless, she could not believe that she was to die, for, being still young, though death was always round her, she believed herself born to be immortal. The sweat was cold upon her face, but Throckmorton was upbraiding her in a lofty nasal voice. 'I am an honourable knight,' he cried, in his affected and shocked tones. 'If I have undone men, it was for love of the Republic. I have nipped many treasons in the bud. The land is safe for a true man because of my work.'
'You are a werewolf,' she shuddered. 'You eat your brother.'
'Why, enough of this talk,' he answered. 'I offer you a service. Will you take it? I am the son of a gentleman. I love wisdom for that she alone is good. Virtue I love for virtue's sake, and I serve my king. What more goeth to the making of a proper man? You cannot tell me.' His voice changed suddenly. 'If you do hate a villain, now is the time to prove it. Would you have him down? Then tell your gossip Winchester that the time approaches to strike, and that I am ready to serve him. I have done some good work for the King's Highness through Privy Seal. But my nose is a good one. I begin to smell out that Privy Seal worketh treasonably.'
'You are a mad fool to think to trick me,' Katharine said. 'Neither you nor I nor any man believes that Privy Seal would work a treason. You would trick me into some foolish utterances. It needed not a cellar in a cut-throat's gully for that.'
'Madam Spitfire,' his voice answered, 'you are a true woman, I a true man. We may walk well together. Before the Most High God, I wish you no ill.'
'Then let me go,' she cried. 'Tell me your lies some otherwhere.'
'The latch is near your hand still,' he said, 'but I will speak to you no otherwhere. It is only here in the abode of murder and evil men that in these evil times a man may speak his mind and fear no listener.' She felt tremulously for the latch, and its rattling set her heart on the jump. When she pulled the door ajar she heard voices in the distant street. It rushed through her mind that he was set neither on murder nor unspeakable things. Or, indeed, he had cut-throats waiting to brain her on the top step. She said tremulously,
'Tell me what you will with me in haste.'
'Why, I have bidden your barge fellows wait for you,' he answered, 'till cock-crow if need were. They shall not leave you. They fear me too much. Shut the door again, for you dread me no more.' Her knees felt suddenly limp and she clung to the latch for support. She believed that Mary had turned the heart of this villain. He repeated that he smelt treason working in the mind of an evil man, and that he would have her tell the Bishop of Winchester. 'I did bring you here, for it is the quickest way. I came to you, for I saw that you were neither craven nor fool, nor high-placed, so that it would be dangerous to be seen talking with you later, when you understood my good will. And I am drawn towards you since you come from near my home.' Katharine said hurriedly between her prayers, "What will you of me? No man cometh to a woman without seeking something from her." "Why, I would have you look favourably upon me," he answered. "I am a goodly man."
"I am meat for your masters," she answered with bitter contempt. "You have the blood of my kin on your hands."
He sighed half mockingly. "If you will not give me your favours," he said in a low, laughing voice, "I would have you remember me according as my aid is of advantage to you."
"God help you," she said. "I believe now that you have it in mind to betray your master."
"I am a man that can be very helpful," he answered, with his laughing assurance that had always in it the ring of a sneer. "Tell Bishop Gardiner again that the hour approaches to strike if these cowards will ever strike." Katharine felt her pulses beat more slowly.
"Sir," she said, "I tell you very plainly that I will not work for the advancement of the Bishop of Winchester. He turned me loose upon the street to-night after I had served him, with neither guard to my feet nor bit to my mouth. If my side goes up, he may go with it, but I love him not."
"Why, then, devise with the Duke of Norfolk," he answered after a pause. "Gardiner is a black rogue, and your uncle a yellow craven. But bid them join hands till the time comes for them to cut each other's throats."
"You are a foul dog to talk thus of noblemen," she said.
He answered, "Oh la! you have little to thank your uncle for. What do you want? Will you play for your own hand? Or will you partner those two against the other?"
"I will never partner with a spy and a villain," she cried hotly.
He cried lightly, "Oh hey, Goosetherumfoodle, you will say differently before long. If you will fight in a fight, you must have tools. Now you have none, and your situation is very parlous."
"I stand on my legs, and no man can touch me," she said hotly.
"But two men can hang you to-morrow," he answered. "One man you know, the other is the Sieur Gardiner. Cromwell hath contrived that you should write a treasonable letter. Gardiner holdeth that letter's self."
Katharine braved her own sudden fears with, "Men are not such villains."
"They are as occasion makes them," he answered, with his voice of a philosopher. "What manner of men these times breed you should know if you not be a fool. It is very certain that Gardiner will hang you with that letter if you work not into his godly hands. See how you stand in need of a counsellor. Now you wish that you had done otherwise."
She said hotly, "Never. So I would act again to-morrow."
"O fool, madam," he answered. "Your cousin's province was never to come within a score miles of the cardinal. Being a drunkard and a boaster, he was sent to Paris to get drunk and to boast."
The horror of the blackness, the damp, the foul smell, and all this treachery made her voice faint. She stammered, "Show me a light, or let the door be opened. I am sick."
"Neither," he answered. "I am as much as you in peril. With a light men may see in at the casement, with an open door they may come eavesdropping. When you have been in this world as long as I, you will love black night well."
Her brain swam for a moment. "My cousin was never in this plot against me," she uttered faintly.
He answered lightly, "You may keep your faith in that toppet. Where you are a fool is to have believed that Privy Seal, who is a wise man, or Viridus, who is a philosopher after my heart, would have sent such a sot and babbler on such a tickle errand."
"He was sent," protested Katharine.
Aye, he was sent to blab about it in every tavern in Paris town. He was sent to frighten the red cap out of Paris town. He was suffered to blab to you that you might set your neck in a noose and be driven to be a spy."
His soft chuckle came through the darkness like an obscene applause of a successful villainy. It was as if he were gloating over her folly and the rectitude of her mind.
"Redcap was working mischief in Paris, but Redcap is timorous. He will go post haste back to Rome, either because of your letter or because of your cousin's boasting. But there are real and secret murderers waiting for him in every town in Italy on the road to Rome. Some are at Brescia, some at Rimini. At Padua there is a man with his neck, like yours, in a noose. It is a goodly contrivance."
"You are a vile pack," Katharine said, and once more the smooth and unctuous sound came from his invisible throat.
How shall you decide what is vileness, or where you will find a virtuous man?' he asked. 'Maybe you will find some among the bones of your old Romans. Yet your Seneca in his day did play the villain. Or maybe some at the court of Mahmoud. I know not, for I was never there. But here is a goodly world, with prizes for them that can take them. Yet virtue may still flourish, for I have done middling well by serving my country. Now I am minded to retire into my lands, to cultivate good letters, and to pursue virtue. For here about the courts there are many distractions. The times are evil times. Yet I will do one good stroke more before I go.' Katharine said heartily, 'If you go down into Lincolnshire I will call upon every man there to fall upon you and hang you.' 'Why,' he said, 'that is why I did come to you, since you are from where my lands are. If I serve you, I would have you to smooth my path there. I ask no more, for now I crave rest and a private life. It is very sure that I should never find that here, or in few parts of the land, so well I have served my King. Therefore, if I serve you, you and yours shall cast above my retired farms and my honourable leisure the shadow of your protection. I ask no more.' He chuckled almost inaudibly. 'I am set to watch you,' he said. 'Viridus will go to Paris to catch another traitor called Brancetor, for the world is full of traitors. Therefore, in a way, it rests with me to hang you.' He seemed to be seated upon a cask, for there was a creaking of old wood, and he spoke very leisurely. Katharine said, 'Good night, and God send you better thoughts.' 'Why, stay, and I will be brief,' he pleaded. 'I dally because it is sweet talking to a fair woman in a black place.' 'You are easily content, for all the sweet words you get from me,' she scorned him. 'See you,' he said earnestly, 'it is true that I am set to watch you. I love you because you are fair. I might bend you, since I hold you in the hollow of my hand. But I am a continent man, and there is here a greater stake to be had than any amorous satisfaction. I would save my country from a man who has been a friend, but is grown a villain. Listen.' He appeared to pause to collect his words together. 'Baumbach, the Saxon ambassador, is here seeking to tack us to the Schmalkaldner heresies. Yesterday he was with Privy Seal, who loveth the Lutheran alliance. So Privy Seal takes him to his house, and shows him his marvellous armoury, which is such that no prince nor emperor hath elsewhere. So says Privy Seal to Baumbach, "I love your alliance, but his Highness will naught of it." And he fetched a heavy sigh. Katharine said, 'What does this here say to me?' 'He fetched a heavy sigh,' Throckmorton continued. 'And your uncle or Gardiner knew how heavy a sigh it was, their hearts would be very glad.' 'This means that the King's Highness is very far from Privy Seal?' Katharine asked. 'His Highness hateth to do business with small princelings.' Throckmorton seemed to laugh at the King's name. 'His high and princely stomach loveth only to deal with his equals, who are great kings. I have seen the letters that have passed about this Cleves wedding. Not one of them is from his Highness's hand. It is Privy Seal alone that shall bear the weight of the blow when rupture cometh.' 'Well, she is a foul slut,' Katharine said, and her heart was full of sympathy for the heavy King. 'Nay, she is none such,' Throckmorton answered. 'If you look upon her with an unjaundiced eye, she will pass for a Christian to be kissed. It is not her body that his Highness hateth, but her fathering. This is a very old quarrel betwixt him and Privy Seal. His Highness hath been wont to see himself the arbiter of the Christian world. Now Privy Seal hath made of him an ally of German princelings. His Highness loveth the old faith and the old royal ways. Now Privy Seal doth seek to make him take up the faith of Schmalkaldners, who are a league of bakers and unfrocked monks. Madam Howard, I tell you that if there were but one man that could strike after the new Parliament is called together—' Katharine cried, 'The very stones that Cromwell hath soaked with blood will rise to fall upon him when the King's feet no longer press them down.' Throckmorton laughed almost inaudibly. 'Norfolk feareth Gardiner for a spy. Gardiner feareth the ambition of Norfolk. Bonner would sell them both to Privy Seal for the price of an archbishopric. The King himself is loath to strike, since no man in the land could get him together such another truckling Parliament as can Privy Seal.' He stopped speaking,
and let his words soak into her in the darkness, and after a long pause her voice came back to her. "It is true that I have heard no man speak as you do. I can see that his dear Highness must be hatefully inclined to this filthy alliance." "Why, you are minded to come into my hut with me," he chuckled. "There are few men so clear in the head as I am. So listen again to me. If you would strike at this man, it is of no avail to meddle with him at home. It shall in no way help you to clamour of good monks done to death, of honest men ruined, of virgins thrown on to dung-heaps. The King hath had the pence of these good monks, the lands of these honest men, and the golden neck-collars off these virgins." She called out, "Keep thy tongue off this sacred King's name. I will listen to no more lewdness." A torch passing outside sent a moving square of light through the high grating across the floor of the cellar. The damp walls became dimly visible with shining snail-tracks on them, and his great form leaning negligently upon a cask, his hand arrested in the pulling of his long beard, his eyes gleaming upon her, sardonic and amused. The light twisted round abruptly and was gone. "You are monstrous fair," he said, and sighed. She shuddered. "No," his mocking voice came again. "Speak not to the King, not to whomsoever you shall elect to speak to the King, of this man's work at home. The King shall let him go very unwillingly, since no man can so pack a Parliament to do the King's pleasure. And he hath a nose for treasons that his Highness would give his own nose to possess." "Keep thy tongue off the King's name," she said again. He laughed and continued pensively. "A very pretty treason might be made up of his speech before his armoury to Baumbach. Mark again how it went. Says he, 'Here are such weaponings as no king, nor prince, nor emperor hath in Christendom. And in this country of ours are 20 gentlemen, my friends, have armouries as great or greater.' Then he sighs heavily and saith, 'But our King will never join with your Schmalkaldners. Yet I would give my head that he should.' Your madamship marks that this was said to the ambassador from the Lutheran League?" "You cannot twist that into a treason," Katharine whispered. "No doubt," he said reasonably. "Such words from a minister to an envoy are but a courtesy, as one would say, 'I fain would help you, but my master wills it not.'" The voice suddenly grew crafty. "But these words, spoken before an armoury and the matter of 20 gentlemen with armouries greater. Say that these 20 are creatures of my Lord Cromwell, implicateur, for the Lutheran cause. And again the matter. No king hath such an armoury. No king, I would have you observe." "Why, this is monstrous foolish pettifogging," Katharine said. "No king would believe a treason in such words." "I call to mind Gilmore of Hurstleas, near our homes," the voice came reflectively. "I did know him," Katharine said. "You had his head." "You never heard how Privy Seal did that," the voice came back mockingly. "Goodman Gilmore had many sheep died of the rot because it rained 7 weeks on end. So coming back from a market day, with too much ale for prudence and too little for silence, he cried, 'Curse on this rain, the weather was never good since knaves ruled about the King.' So that came to the ears of Privy Seal, who made a treason of it, and had his sheep and his house and his lands and his head. He was but one in 10,000 that have gone the same road home from market and made speeches as treasonable." "Thus poor Gilmore died?" Katharine asked. "What a foul world this is!" "Time it was cleansed," he answered. He let his words rankle for a time, then he said softly, "Privy Seal's words before his armoury were as treasonable as Gilmore's on the market road." Again he paused. "Privy Seal may call thee to account for such a treason," he said afterwards. "He holdeth thee in a hollow of his hand." She did not speak. He said softly, "It is a folly to be too proud to fight the world with the world's weapons." The heavy darkness seemed to thrill with her silence. He could tell neither whether she were pondering his words nor whether she still scorned him. He could not even hear her breathing. "God help me," he said at last in a high angry note. "I am not such a man as to be played with too long. People fear me." She kept silence still, and his voice grew high and shrill. "Madam Howard, I can bend you to my will. I have the power to make such a report of you as will hang you to-morrow." Her voice came to him expressionlessly, without any inflection. In few words, what would he have of her? She played his own darkness off against him, so that he could tell nothing new of her mood. He answered swiftly: "I will that you tell the men you know what I have told you. You are a very little thing. It were no more to me to cut you short than to drown a kitten. But my own neck I prize. What I have told you I would have come to the ears of my Lord of Winchester. I may not be seen to speak with him myself. If you will not tell him, another will. But I would rather it were you." "Evil dreams make thy nights hideous," she cried out so suddenly that his voice choked in his throat. "Thou art such dirt as I would avoid to tread upon, and shall I take thee into my hand?" She was panting with disgust and scorn. "I have listened to thee. Listen thou to me. Thou art so filthy that if thou couldst make me a queen by the touch of a finger, I had rather be a goose girl and eat grass. If by thy forged tales I could cast down Mahmoud, I had rather be his slave than thy accomplice. Could I lift my head if I had joined myself to thee? Thou Judas to the fiend! Junius Brutus, when he did lay siege to a town, had a citizen come to him that would play the traitor. He accepted his proffered help, and when the town was taken, he did flay the betrayer. But thou art so filthy that thou shouldst make me do better than that noble Roman, for I would flay thee, disdaining to be aided by thee, and upon thy skin I would write a message to thy master, saying that thou wouldst have betrayed him." His laugh rang out discordant and full of black mirth. For a long time his shoulders seemed to shake. He spoke at last quite calmly. "You will have a very short course in this world," he said. A hoarse and hollow shouting reverberated from the gully. The glow of a torch grew bright in the window space. Katharine had been upon the point of opening the door, but she paused, fearing to meet some night villains in the gully. Throckmorton was now silent, as if he utterly disdained her, and a frightful blow upon the wood of the door, so certain were they that the torch would pass on, made them spring some yards further into the cellar. The splintering blows were repeated, the sound of them was deafening. Glaring light entered suddenly through a great crack, and the smell of smoke. Then the door fell in half, one board of it across the steps, the other smashing back to the wall upon its hinges. Sparks dripped from the torch, smoke eddied down, and upon the cellar steps were the legs of a man who rested a great axe upon the ground and panted for breath.
"Up the steps," he grunted. "If you ever ran, now run. The guard will not enter here."
Katharine sped up the steps. It was old Rochford's face that greeted hers beneath the torch. He grunted again, "Run you. I am spent," and suddenly dashed the torch to the ground. At the entry of the tunnel, some make of creature caught at her sleeve. She screamed and struck at a gleaming eye with the end of her crucifix. Then nothing held her, and she ran to where, at the mouth of the gully, there were a great many men with torches and swords peering into the darkness of the passage. In the barge Margot made an outcry of joy and relief, and the other ladies uttered civil speeches. The old man, whose fur near the neck had been slashed by a knife thrust as he came away, explained pleasantly that he was able to strike good blows still. But he shook his head none the less. It was evil, he said, to have such lovers as this new one. Her cousin was bad, but this rapscallion must be worse indeed to harbour her in such a place. Margot, who knew her London, had caught him at the barge, to which he had hurried.
"Aye," he said, "I thought you had played me a trick and gone off with some spark. But when I heard to what place, I fetched the guard along with me. Well for you that it was I, for they had not come for any other man, and then you had been stuck in the street. For, you see, whether you would have had me fetch you away or no, it is 10 to 1 that a gallant who would take you there would mean that you should never come away alive, and God help you whilst you lived in that place."
Katharine said, "Why, I pray God that you may die on the green grass yet, with time for a priest to shrive you. I was taken there against my will." She told him no more of the truth, for it was not every man's matter, and already she had made up her mind that there was but one man to whom to speak. She went into the dark end of the barge and prayed until she came to Greenwich, for the fear of the things she had escaped still made her shudder, and in the company of Mary and the saints of Lincolnshire alone could she feel any calmness. She thought they whispered round her in the night, amid the lapping of the water. End of section 14. The Fifth Queen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. The Fifth Queen, by Ford Madox Ford. Part 2, Chapter 8. The stables were esteemed the most magnificent that the king had. 3 times they had been pulled down and again set up after designs by Holbein the painter. The buildings formed 3 sides of a square. The fourth gave into a great paddock, part of the park, in which the horses galloped or the mares ran with their foals. That morning there was a glint of sun in the opalescent clouds. Horseboys in grey with double roses worked on their chests were spreading sand in the great quadrangle, fenced in with white palings, between the buildings where the chargers were trained to the manage. Each wing of the buildings was 1/4 of a mile long, of grey stone thatched with rushwork that came from the great beds all along the river and rose into curious peaks like bushes along each gable. On the right were the mares, the riding jennets for the women, and their saddle-rooms. On the left the pack animals, mules for priests and the places for their housings. In the centre, on each side of a vast barn that held the provender, were the stables of the coursers and stallions that the king himself rode or favoured. Of these huge beasts there were 200, each in a cage within the houses, for many were savage terrors both of men and of each other. On the door of each cage there was written the name of the horse, as Sir Brian, Sir Bors, or Old Leo, and the sign of the constellation under which each was born, the months in which in consequence it was propitious or dangerous to ride them, and pentagons that should prevent witches, warlocks, or evil spirits from casting spells upon the great beasts. Their housings and their stall armour, covered with grease to keep the rust from them, hung upon pulleys before each stall, and their polished neck-armours branched out from the walls in a long file, waving over the gateways right into the distance, the face-pieces with the shining spikes in the foreheads hanging at the ends, the eye-holes carved out and the nostril-places left vacant, so that they resembled an arcade of the skeletons of unicorns' heads. It was quiet and warm in the long and light aisles. There was a faint smell of stable hartshorn and the sound of beans being munched leisurely. From time to time there came a thunder from distant boxes, as 2 untrained stallions that Privy Seal the day before had given the king kicked against the immense baulks of the sliding doors in their cage-stalls. The old knight was flustered because it was many days since the king had deigned to come in the morning, and there were many beasts to show him. In his steel armour, from which his old head stood out benign and silvery, he strutted stiffly from cage to cage, talking softly to his horses and cursing at the harnessers. Sicily Elliot sat on a high stool from which she could look out of window, and gibed at him as he passed. "Let me grease your pot-lids, goodly servant. You creak like a roasting-jack." He smiled at her with an engrossed air, and hurried himself to pull tight the head-strap of a great barb that was fighting with 4 men. A tucket of trumpets sounded, silvery and thin through the cold grey air. A page came running with his sallet helmet. "Why, I will lace it for him," Cicely cried, and ran, pushing away the boy. She laced it under the chin and laughed. "Now you may kiss my cheek, so that I know what it is to be kissed by a man in pot-lids." He swung himself, grunting a little, into the high saddle, and laughed at her with the air of a man very master of himself. The tucket thrilled again. Katharine Howard pushed the window open, craning out to see the king come. The horse, proud and mincing, appearing in its grey steel as great as an elephant, stepped yet so daintily that all its weight of iron made no more sound than the rhythmic jingling of a sabre, and man and horse passed like a flash of shadow out of the door. Cicely hopped back onto the stool and shivered. "We shall see these 2 old fellows very well without getting such a rheumatism as Lady Rochford's." And she pulled the window to against Katharine's face, and laughed at the vacant and far-away eyes that the girl turned upon her. "You are thinking of the centaurs of the Isles of Greece," she jeered. "Not of my knight and his old fashions of ironwork and horse-dancing. Yet such another will never be again, so perfect in the old fashions." The old knight passed the window to the sound of trumpets towards his invisible master, swaying as easily to the gallop of his enormous steel beast as cupids that you may see in friezes ride upon dolphins down the sides of great billows. But Katharine's eyes were upon the ground. The window showed only some yards of sand, of grey sky, and of whitened railings. Trumpet blew after trumpet, and behind her back horse after horse went out, its iron feet ringing on the bricks of the stable to die into thuds and silence once the door was passed. Cicely Elliot plagued her, tickling her pink ears with a piece of straw and sending out shrieks of laughter. And Katharine, motionless as a flower in breathless sunlight, was inwardly trembling. She imagined that she must be pale and hollow-eyed enough to excite the compassion of the black-haired girl, for she had not slept at all for thinking, and her eyes ached and her hands felt weak, resting upon the brick of the window-sill. Horses raced past, shaking the building, in pairs, in fours, in twelves. They curveted together, pawed their way through intricate figures, arched their great necks, or reined in suddenly at the gallop, cast up the sand in showers and great flakes of white foam. The old knight came into view, motioning with his lance to invisible horsemen from the other side of the manage, and the top notes of his voice reached them thinly as he shouted the words of direction. But the King was still invisible. Suddenly Cicely Elliot cried out, "Why, the old boy hath dropped his lance! Quel malheur!" And indeed the lance lay in the sand, the horse darting wildly aside at the thud of its fall. The old man shook his iron fist at the sky, and his face was full of rage and shame in the watery sunlight that penetrated into his open helmet. "Poor old sinful man," Cicely said, with a note of concern deep in her throat. A knave in grey ran to pick up the lance, but the knight sat, his head hanging on his chest, like one mortally stricken riding from a battlefield. Katharine's heart was in her mouth, and all her limbs were weak together. A great shoulder in heavy furs, the back of a great cap, came into the view of a window. An immense hand grasped the white balustrade of the manage rails. He was leaning over, a figure all squares, like that on a court card, only that the embroidered bonnet raked abruptly to one side, as if it had been thrown on to the square head. Henry was talking to the old knight across the sand. The sight went out of her eyes, and her throat uttered indistinguishable words. She heard Cicely Elliot say, "What will you do? My old knight is upon the point of tears." And Katharine felt herself brushing along the wall of the corridor towards the open door. The immense horse with his steel plates spreading out like skirts from its haunches dropped its head motionlessly close to the rail, and the grey wrinkling steel of the figure on its back caught the reflection of the low clouds in flakes of light and shadow. The old knight muttered indistinguishable words of shame inside his helmet. The King said, "Aye, God help us, we all grow old together." And Katharine heard herself cry out, "Last night you were about very late, because evil men plotted against me. Any man might drop his lance in the morning." Henry moved his head leisurely over his shoulder. His eyelids went up in haughty incredulity, so that the whites showed all round the dark pupils. He could not turn far enough to see her without moving his feet, and appearing to disdain so much trouble, he addressed the old man heavily. "3 times I dropped my pen writing one letter yesterday," he said. "If you had my troubles you might groan of growing old." But the old man was too shaken with the disgrace to ride any more, and Henry added testily, "I came here for distractions, and you have run me up against old cares because the sun shone in your eyes. If you will get tricking it with wenches overnight, you cannot be fresh in the morning. This is gospel for all of us. Get in and disarm. I have had enough of horses for this morning." As if he had dispatched that piece of business, he turned, heavily and all of one piece, right round upon Katharine. He set his hands into his side, and stood with his square feet wide apart. "It is well that you remember how to kneel," he laughed ironically, motioning her to get up before she had reached her knees. "You are the pertest baggage I have ever met." He had recognised her whilst the words were coming out of his great lips. "Why, is it you the old fellow should marry? I heard he had found a young filly to frisk it with him." Katharine, her face pale and in consternation, stammered that Cicely Elliot was in the stables. He said, "Bide there, I will go speak with her.
The old fellow is very cast down. We must hearten him. It is true that he groweth old, and has been a good servant.' He pulled the dagger that hung from a thin gold chain on his neck into its proper place on his chest, squared his shoulders, and swayed majestically into the door of the stable. Katharine heard his voice raised to laugh and dropping into his gracious but still peremptory ardent tones. She remained alone upon the level square of smooth sand. Not a soul was in sight, for when the King came to seek distraction with his horses, he brought no one that could tease him. She was filled with fears. He beckoned her to him with his head, ducking it right down to his chest and back again, and the glances of his eyes seemed to strike her like hammer blows when he came out from the door. "It was you, then, that composed that fine speech about the Fortunate Isles?" he said. "I had sent for you this morning. I will have it printed." She wanted to hang her head like a pupil before her master, but she needs must look him in the eyes, and her voice came strangely and unearthly to her own ears. "I could not remember the speech the Bishop of Winchester wanted me to say. I warned him I have no memory for the Italian, and my fright muddled my wits." Internal laughter shook him, and once again he set his feet far apart, as if that aided him to look at her. "Your fright?" he said. "I am even now so frightened," she uttered, "that it is as if another spoke with my throat." His great mouth relaxed as if he accepted his due a piece of skilful flattery. Suddenly she sank down upon her knees, her dress spreading out beneath her, her hands extended and her red lips parted as the beak of a bird opens with terror. He uttered lightly, "Why, get up. You should kneel so only to your God." And he touched his cap, with his habitual heavy gesture at the sacred name. "I have somewhat to ask," she whispered. He laughed again. "They are always asking. But get up. I have left my stick in my room. Help me to my door." She felt the heavy weight of his arm upon her shoulder as soon as she stood beside him. He asked her suddenly what she knew of the Fortunate Islands that she had talked of in her speech. "They lie far in the Western Ocean. I had an Italian would have built me ships to reach them," he said, and Katharine answered, "I do take them to be a fable of the ancients, for they had no heaven to pray for." When his eyes were not upon her she was not afraid, and the heavy weight of his hand upon her shoulder made her feel firm to bear it. But she groaned inwardly, because she had urgent words that must be said, and she imagined that nothing could be calmer in the Fortunate Islands than this to walk and converse about their gracious image that shone down the ages. He said with a heavy, dull voice, "I would give no little to be there." Suddenly she heard herself say, her heart leaping in her chest, "I do not like the errand they have sent my cousin upon." The blessed utopia of the lost islands had stirred in the King all sorts of griefs that he would shake off, and all sorts of remembrances of youth, of open fields, and a wide world that shall be conquered, all the hopes and instincts of happiness, ineffable and indestructible, that never die in passionate men. He said dully, his thoughts far away, "What errand have they sent him upon? Who is your goodly cousin?" She answered, "They put it about that he should murder Cardinal Pole." And she shook so much that he was forced to take his hand from her shoulder. He leaned upon the manage rail, and halted to rest his leg that pained him. "It is a good errand enough," he said. She was panting like a bird that you hold in your hand, so that all her body shook, and she blurted out, "I would not that my cousin should murder a churchman." And before his eyebrows could go up in an amazed and haughty stare, "I am like to be hanged between Privy Seal and Winchester." He seemed to fall against the white bar of the rail for support, his eyes wide with incredulity. He said, "When were women hanged here?" "Sir," she said earnestly, "you are the only one I can speak to. I am in great peril from these men." He shook his head at her. "You have gone mad," he said gravely. "What is this fluster?" "Give me your ear for a minute," she pleaded. Her fear of him as a man seemed to have died down. As a king she had never feared him. "These men do seek each other's lives, and many are like to be undone between them." His nostrils dilated like those of a high-mettled horse that starts back. What maggot is this?' he said imperiously. 'Here there is no disunion.' He rolled his eyes angrily, and breathed short, twisting his hands. It was part of his nature to insist that all the world should believe in the concord of his people. He had walked there to talk with a fair woman. He had imagined that she would pique him with pert speeches. 'Speak quickly,' he said in a peremptory voice, and his eyes wandered up the path between the rails and the stable walls. 'You are a pretty piece, but I have no time to waste in woeful nonsense.'
'Alas,' she said, 'this is the very truth of the truth. Privy Seal hath tricked me.' He laughed heavily and incredulously, and he sat right down upon the rail. She began to tell him her whole story. All through the night she had been thinking over the coil into which she had fallen. It was a matter of desperate haste, for she had imagined that Throckmorton would go at once or before dawn and make up a tale to Privy Seal, so that she should be put out of the way. To her no counter-plotting was possible. Gardiner she regarded with a young disdain. He was a man who walked in plots. And she did not love him because he had treated her like a servant after she had walked in his masque. Her uncle Norfolk was a craven who had left her to sink or swim. Throckmorton, a werewolf who would defile her if she entered into any compact with him. He would inform against her with the first light of the morning, and she had trembled in her room at every footstep that passed the door. She had imagined guards coming with their pikes down to take her. She had trembled in the very stables. The King stood above these plots and counterplots. She imagined him breathing a calmer air that alone was fit for her. To one of her house the King was no more than a man. At home she had regarded him very little. She had read too many chronicles. He was first among such men as her menfolk because her menfolk had so willed it. He was their leader, no more majestic than themselves, and less sacred than most priests. But in that black palace she felt that all men trembled before him. It gave her for him a respect. He was at least a man before whom all these cravens trembled. And she imagined herself such another being, strong, confident, unafraid. Therefore to the King alone she could speak. She imagined him sympathizing with her on account of the ignoble trick that Cromwell had played upon her, as if he too must recognize her such another as himself. Being young, she felt that God and the saints alike fought on her side. She was accustomed to think of herself as so assured and so buoyant that she could bear alike the commands of such men as Cromwell, as Gardiner, and as her cousin with a smile of wisdom. She could bide her time. Throckmorton had shocked her, not because he was a villain who had laid hands upon her, but because he had fooled her so that unless she made haste those other men would prove too many for her. They would hang her. Therefore she must speak to the King. Lying still, looking at the darkness, listening to the breathing of Margot Poins, who slept across the foot of her bed, she felt no fear whatsoever of Henry. It was true that she had trembled before him at the masque, but she swept that out of her mind. She could hardly believe that she had trembled and forgotten the Italian words that she should have spoken. Yet she had stood there transfixed, without a syllable in her mind. And she had managed to bring out any words at all only by desperately piecing together the idea of Ovid's poem and Aulus Gellius's eulogy of Marcus Crassus, which was very familiar in her ears because she had always imagined for a hero such a man, munificent, eloquent, noble and learned in the laws. The hall had seemed to blaze before her. It was only because she was so petrified with fright that she had not turned tail or fallen on her knees. Therefore she must speak to him when he came to see his horses. She must bring him to her side before the tall spy with the eyes and the mouth that grinned as if at the thought of virtue could give Cromwell the signal to undo her. She spoke vehemently to the King. She was indignant, because it seemed to her she was defiled by these foul men who had grasped at her. "They have brought me down with a plot," she said. She stretched out her hand and cried earnestly, "Sir, believe that what I would have I ask for without any plotting." He leant back upon his rail. His round and boding eyes avoided her face. "You have spoilt my morning betwixt you," he muttered. "First it was old Rashford who failed. Could a man not see his horses gallop without being put in mind of decay and death? Had he need of that? Why, I asked you for pleasant converse," he finished. She pleaded, "Sir, I knew not that Pole was a traitor. Before God, I would now that he were caught up.
but assuredly a way could be found with the Bishop of Rome.'
'This is a parcel of nonsense,'
he shouted suddenly, dismissing her whole story. Would she have him believe it was thinkable that a spy should swear away a woman's life? She had far better spend her time composing of fine speeches. 'Sir,' she cried, 'before the Most High God....' He lifted his hand. 'I am tired of perpetual tears,' he muttered, and looked up the perspective of stable walls and white rails as if he would hurry away. She said desperately, 'You will meet with tears perpetual so long as this man....' He lifted his hand, clenched right over his head. 'By God,' he bade, 'may I never rest from cat and dog quarrels! I will not hear you. It is to drive a man mad when he most needs solace.' He jerked himself down from the rail and shot over his shoulder. 'You will break your head if you run against a wall. I will have you in gaol ere nightfall.' And he seemed to push her backward with his great hand stretched out. End of Project Gutenberg's